Let's talk to Robert Jenrick, of course, who is the Tory leadership frontrunner, wants to be leader of the Tory party. I think he will be. He's written an amazing piece in the Mail today talking about the English identity under threat. He believes it's under threat because of a mixture of the wokists and also the sort of the cancel culture, the education systems and mass immigration. Robert, very good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to be on the show.
Yeah, great to see you. A very interesting piece, this. I think, you know, no doubt there will be people who say, you know, Robert Jenrick's lurched to the right. What's he thinking? But all of the things you say, all the things you write about, the radicalisation, the violence, the intercommunal sectarian sort of troubles that we've seen in recent weeks, all of the problems, really, that England seems to be struggling with at the moment, an awful lot of them to do with immigration.
Yeah, well, I think that England is not a country at ease with itself at the moment. I'm a proud Brit, and I want to see all of the home nations of the UK, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, also having strong identities. But I worry that English identity, in particular, has been downgraded and denigrated in recent decades. And part of that is that influential people, whether that be politicians or in the media, in Scotland, Wales, and elsewhere, take great pride in their identities. But far too often, the opposite is true in England. And I think it's important that we speak about England and we take pride in our national identity, as well as you say, we ensure that we have our children being taught about English history in our schools, that we don't denigrate it, and that we tackle the need to have a strong border so that illegal migration is addressed. And we are honest with ourselves that if you have such large numbers of people coming in to the country every year legally, it makes it very difficult to successfully integrate those people and for them to adopt our national identity and culture.
Yes.
And I think that is what has gone wrong in the last few decades.
Yes, because you talk as well about a nation should put its own citizens first, and people coming to this country from other countries and other cultures should be prepared to assimilate in a way which they do in many other countries and in a way that they used to do in immigration in this country. You know, I'm old enough to remember, you know, when there was a lot of Irish immigration into this country, there was a lot of Italian immigration, there was a lot of European immigration in general, all the way through my sort of childhood and my younger years, you know. You'd always run into people from Spain or from Italy working in coffee shops and that kind of thing. And, you know, while they retained their kind of love of their own countries, they loved being in Britain, and most of them became British citizens. I don't see that with the sort of mass immigration we're getting now coming from, you know, parts of the world where they don't perhaps recognise what Britain is and what England is.
I think something has changed in the last 20 years, and it's partly due to the sheer scale of migration that we've had. In 25 years prior to 1997, net migration to our country was 69,000. In the 25 years since Tony Blair, it's been 5.9 million. And so the sheer numbers have made it almost impossible to successfully integrate people and for people to share our national identity and ensure that it's passed on successfully to the next generation. Because you don't come off a plane at Heathrow and immediately be English. England isn't an ethnicity. It's a nation in which people of all faiths and ethnicities can be a part. But it does take time, and it also needs to be nurtured, particularly by our politicians, those in the media, those in the civil service, and those who are in charge of our national institutions. And I think that they have generally neglected our national identity, at times denigrated it, and refused to speak up for it in the way that the same people do in Scotland and Wales, and we need to change that.
Did you have these conversations when you were in government? Because you were immigration minister, you resigned because you weren't happy with the way that Rishi Sunak was handling the small boats crisis and all of that, I think I'm right in saying. And I wonder what kind of opposition you heard from people inside the Tory party, because, you know, people will say sometimes that these kinds of conversations are difficult. I don't think they're difficult. I think you just can have them. But some people think that it's racist. Some people think that it's in some way, you know, right-wing or far-right to talk about immigration in this way. I mean, I'm not one of those people, by the way. But did you find opposition to these kinds of ideas in government when you were in it?
Yeah, I think there are people within government, within the civil service, within education, within our museums and public institutions who don't share my point of view, who have been too quick to denigrate and to disregard our history. And I want to change that. As I say, I think it begins by people like myself speaking about England in a positive way and beginning this national conversation, which I'm trying to do today, about how we can ensure that our English identity is placed on a higher footing alongside those of Scotland and Wales, because we can be both proud Brits and proud of our English, Welsh, or indeed Scottish nationality. I think we have to ensure that in schools, our children are taught about our history and that they grow up to feel great pride in our country like I do and I did, and I try and instill in my own children. I think we do have to have a strong border, because a nation cannot succeed unless it clamps down on illegal migration. And the lion's share of the impact of illegal migration is being seen in England, and in particularly in English cities. And we've also got to ensure that we slow the pace of mass migration, because the scale that we've seen in recent decades, and in particular in the last few years, is just too great. And once again, that is being focused in particular places in some of our big English cities. And there, it is inevitable that it leads to a degradation of our culture and of the ties that bind us together. And I worry that the culture and identity that gives us our sense of national togetherness is under great strain at the moment, and we've got to protect that.
And what would you do about some of those cities? Because, you know, we all know of a place in England, maybe it's in Leicester, maybe it's in Manchester, maybe it's in Leeds, maybe it's in London, where there are, you know, pockets of sort of ghettos almost, ethnic ghettos, where, you know, people who live there are not really part of England. You know, they live in their own little community. And we, you know, we saw some of the writings in Hare Hill in Leeds, and they live in these communities kind of untouched by English culture altogether.
Well, it begins by not making the problem worse. And that in it of itself is a big change, because that means bringing down the number of people who are coming into our country legally every year from the historic highs that we've seen recently. And I fought within government to change our immigration system and brought into place reforms that will lead to a reduction around 300,000 people fewer coming into the country every year. And that's an important first step. But to me, that was never the end. What we need to do is return to our historic norm, whereby the numbers are coming into our country in the tens of thousands or indeed lower. And that's what I propose if I'm lucky enough to lead the Conservative Party and one day the country. That is what we will implement. We've also got to have a country in which our laws are enforced without fear or favour. And as I've consistently said, I worry that at times our police and our politicians are putting community relations over robust enforcement of the law. We should have a zero tolerance attitude towards any form of extremism in this country. As a Home Office Minister, I revoked the visas of people who were behaving in a way which fell below our standards and values as a country. You know, coming into this country as a student or on a work visa is a privilege. It's not a right. And if you fall below our standards, you should be kicked out. And I want to see more of that. And then we also need to have a much better integration policy so that young people are being taught about our history and culture in schools, and we're encouraging people to live side by side, not in communities where there's the separateness, which you see in some places, particularly in a small number of our big cities right now.
Absolutely. Robert, let me move you on to the current state of our Labour government. I want you to have a look at this clip of Keir Starmer talking about why he needs to watch football from a lofty box.
I've had season tickets at Arsenal for a long time now, up in the stands, where I've gone with my boy and my friends for year after year after year. Now I'm Prime Minister. The security advice is that I can't go into the stands. Or if I did, you'd have to put so much sort of security in that it would cost the taxpayer a fortune. As a result, I've been offered tickets elsewhere in the ground where it's more secure. We don't have to use taxpayer money on additional security, and that's why I've taken the decision that I have. I think most people watching this would say, well, fair dues. think they'd think I was pretty self-centred if I said, I'd much prefer to be in the stands, by the way. If I said, I'm going in the stands and you, the taxpayer, are going to have to pick up the tab for the security. I'm not really going to do that.
Quite an extraordinary thing to say, isn't it? I mean, Rishi Sunak managed to go to Southampton sort of week after week without sitting in a box. You know, he seemed to be perfectly happy as Prime Minister to do so.
Well, look, I'm not privy to the security advice that Keir Starmer's received, but as you say, I seem to remember Rishi Sunak sitting in the stands at Southampton, and I remember Theresa May and John Major sitting in the stands at Lord's watching the cricket. So this seems to be a new development, that Keir Starmer needs to be in an executive box to go and watch the football. Look, I think we're beginning to see, in just the first few weeks of this Labour government, a sense of entitlement and privilege, and above all of hypocrisy. The very things that Keir Starmer was calling out the last Conservative government for doing, he is not just doing himself, but doing on steroids, and the public are already sick of that.
And it's not just him. I mean, they're all at it. 72,000 has been given to Angela Rayner. You know, Bridget Phillipson, 14,000. I mean, Lord Alley's a sort of one-man piggy bank, it seems, for this particular group of politicians. But it's not going away, this, and they seem to not quite get how people in this country are fed up to see it, right? And I'm wondering if this is the new expenses scandal. Do you think it is?
Well, Keir Starmer promised a government of service, and instead he's delivering a government of self-service, where every day we hear about pay rises for his cronies, accepting freebies like clothes and glasses, things which are completely extraordinary for most of us, even people like me who have been in politics. I can't imagine asking somebody else to pay for the suit on my back or the glasses that I wear. I think this reflects very badly on the character and the judgment of Keir Starmer and this new Labour government.
It really does. Conservative Party conference coming up, I think, next weekend. Have you got a secret plan to sort of emerge out of a birthday cake or something and suddenly declare yourself to be the only possible leader that they could have?
Not yet, but if you've got any ideas, let me know. I'm hoping to do lots of events there and to do some speeches where I continue to set out what I've been saying today on the show and previously, which is my vision for the future of the party, which is one in which we accept that we made mistakes in the past. We're painfully honest about those. And we come forward with some serious answers to the big questions facing the country, like tackling mass migration, like getting the economy growing again, like fixing the NHS and public services, and taking pride again in our national culture.
Robert Jenrick, thank you very much indeed. Tory leadership front runner, as we know, of course, and also Tory MP.